times. People get sick, but guess what? Please God, with the right medical attention, we get well, we get better, and our situations improve. So each of these situations, we have to pay attention and realize that no matter what's going on in our life, never to despair. Don't give up. Okay? It will get better. With that in mind, let's talk about the fast of Tisha B'Av. Many people theorized that the Jewish sense of humor is actually a coping mechanism. Did I tell you when I was in Israel, we went to visit the Jerusalem Zoo? Did I take you to the zoo yet? Or yes, okay. But I didn't take you to the exhibit. They had the future era, the era of Mashiach, and they had in this a wolf and a lamb. And it was, yeah, that's the biblical zoo in Jerusalem. And they had the wolf and the lamb. So I asked the zookeeper, I said, that's impressive. Mashiach hasn't come yet. How do you get a wolf and a lamb to live together? He says, very simple. We feed a new lamb every day. So when you look at Jewish history, we look at our challenging, difficult times, and I think we're living through a very difficult time today. As much as, thank God, we are not as affected by it here, but if you look at Jews in the United States of America, Jews in Europe, Jews in other parts of the world, there is serious anti-Semitism, and it's growing. And the rate and the veracity and the ferociousness of anti-Semitism in America today is unbelievable. It's something we can never have imagined and believed would ever happen in our lifetime. And when you learn, when you look at our history, we see that the truth is our history is fraught with tragedies and destructions and terrible, difficult times. And we've learned to not only survive, but thrive. So today I want to focus on the fact that a large number of the tragic events throughout our history happened when? By the way, are we live? I don't see us. I don't see if we're live on YouTube yet. So give me a second just to check if we are live, because I need to know. If anyone's watching us on YouTube, will you let us know if we're live? Okay, I have a feeling we are, but it's not showing us on the screen if we're live. Okay. But when I go into YouTube, I see us playing there. So it looks like we're here. All right. Either way, my friends. So a lot of these tragic events happened specifically in this time, in the month of Av, and particularly on the date of Tisha B'Av, which is this coming Wednesday, Thursday. And it's a day of mourning, a day of tragedy. And what we're going to try to focus on today is how to go from mourning, M-O-U-R-I-N-G, to mourning, to a new dawn, to a new era, to better times, please God. So what's the first tragic? What's that? Oh, what it takes to change it is you. Very good. You are the one that gets to change it. Very good. Very good. Great observation. So let's look at a little bit of history, my friends. What was the first Tisha B'Av in history? What was, Brian, just a moment, okay? Let me get my words out. Okay. Glad you've been coming, thank God, for a bunch of years. So the first indication that Tisha B'Av would become a Jewish day of national mourning was actually a famous case in the Torah that happened on Tisha B'Av. Who remembers what incident that was? Kamsa Bar Kamsa is a Talmudic story that is mentioned in the Gemara that happened much later. We'll get to the Kamsa Bar Kamsa story as well. But just very plainly, let's dissect Tisha B'Av first. Tisha means the 9th. B'Av is the month of Av. Okay, so we're now in the month of Av. Today is day 6 in the month of Av, and day 9 is Wednesday night. It is the saddest day in our calendar. It's a national day of mourning and fasting, and now we'll go into the actual events. But here are only some of the events. I didn't get to put all the events on here, so we're going to have to fill in some of the other tragic events that occur. What other events occurred? The first one would be read in the Parsha last week, the story of the spies. And Moshe reminding the Jewish people, don't be like the spies. Their negative report brought 40 years of wandering upon the Jewish people. And what day did they bring back that negative report? Tisha B'Av. Now, the other famous events are the destruction of the first temple, as you can see here on the screen. 5 centuries later, we have the destruction of the second temple, was destroyed on the exact same day, sending the Jews into our long exile in the past, 2 millennia now. Obviously, I didn't get a chance to populate all of them in. My apologies. Last night I was watching a game, so I didn't get to do I should have done this during the game because it was a bad game. It was a bad game, and I meant to have my computer there, but my kids wanted my attention on the screen, and then chauffeuring them around. Either way, so not everything made it into the slides, so you'll excuse me for that. But maybe it's also to test your memories of what other events you're familiar with. It didn't end with the destruction of the temple, because the Romans destroyed the cities of Beitar. They slaughtered the population. They defeated the Bar Kokhba revolt. And Bar Kokhba, as you all know, was the leader of the famous rebellion against the Romans. They thought he would be the Mashiach, or the harbinger of Mashiach in his time. Don't forget, Bar Kokhba was about 70 years after the destruction of the second temple. How many years after the destruction of the first temple did the Jews return to Jerusalem, to Israel? 70. So being 70, it's like a Gzeira Shava, they thought, that's it, Mashiach has come to save us, and they were devastated when he was defeated. So that is another event that occurred on Tisha B'Av. Other famous events, again, one that did not make it into the screen, but very important to remember, is the Jews were expelled from England on Tisha B'Av. What year was that? 1290. The expulsion of Jews from England was a King John, I think, in the year 1290. Okay? Pardon? How did they get to England? The same way they got to Spain and India and all the other, Germany and France and Rome. I think after the destruction of the second temple, many Jews were taken as captives to Rome, and from the Roman Empire, they dispersed to other places. We know, if you recall, last year we did a course, and we spent a lot of time in that course focusing on the golden age of Spanish Jewry, exactly. And that came to a close. What date was the Spanish expulsion, the Inquisition? 1492 is the year, and by Tisha B'Av was the last day they had to leave Spain or face the auto de fe or to convert to Christianity. And now even World War I, which I remember previously searching up the dates, it doesn't line up exactly with Tisha B'Av, but it began around Tisha B'Av 1914. If anyone wants, you could Google it and let us know what you come up with. But if I recall, it was somewhere around Tisha B'Av, maybe in the 9 days. You know, actually here, I'm picking up an article as we speak. It says here as follows. There is a curious idea floating around that World War I commenced on the 9th day of Av, okay? Now, if you look at the calendar, I don't find it lining up exactly, so hence I want to just figure this out. I call it curious since it takes fairly creative reading of history to see the wars having begun on a single particular day. That's the truth. It didn't begin on one specific day. They say August 1st, 1914, but already on the 28th of July, Austria declared war on Serbia. The first shots of the war were fired on the 29th of July. Those days correspond to, anyone want to guess? The 5th and the 6th, that's today, 6th of Av, 1914. So First World War began today, 112 years ago. That's very interesting. Now, it was on Tisha B'Av, already after Russia had fully mobilized, that Germany invaded Luxembourg and declared war on Russia. Okay? So it's not necessarily on Tisha B'Av itself. What's that? But it's during the 9 days. You could say that maybe the war, maybe it intensified, but either way, the tragedies that happened during this period of the 9 days, you could see how Tisha B'Av is related very much to this specific day. But there are a few points. Also, we know that the First World War is what directly led chain of events to the Holocaust and the Second World War and everything else that occurred with it. So certainly that's part of it. There is a historian, his name is Ispar Elbogen, and he has a book called The Century of Jewish Life. And he wrote it before he passed away in 1943. It was published posthumously, and he places the beginning of the First World War on Tisha B'Av 1914. Okay? So it is interesting looking at these different sources. There's a lot of them, but I don't have to go too far, and I'm not going to go into the whole history. But the point is, if it's not exactly on Tisha B'Av, it's the days leading up to Tisha B'Av. And we could see that these are tragic days, that many a calamity befell our people during this time. But the primary focus of the day of Tisha B'Av itself is the day of mourning. Yes, it's true this week that leads up to Tisha B'Av, we avoid certain activities. So, for example, I hope Vusi doesn't have meat for lunch again today, because last week, I don't know how that happened. I'm going to have to just check on the delivery orders. But we don't eat meat this week. In fact, till Friday afternoon, no meat consumption. We don't drink wine. Havdalah Saturday night, made it on a cup of beer. I don't know why I convinced myself in my teenage years that I liked beer. Beer tastes disgusting, please. Whoever convinced themselves they actually like the taste of beer, or even whiskey or vodka for that matter, okay? Maybe some people like the effect afterwards of oblivion, but I can't see what the joy of it is. Anyways, it was my first beer in a long while that I had on a Saturday night, because we don't drink wine this week. On Shabbos was the exception. Shabbos, you're allowed to have chicken and meat. But this week, we don't listen to music. We don't cut our nails. We don't cut our hair. Pardon? No weddings. Okay? So there are certain things. Now, I was invited to an engagement party last week. Pardon? What's that? Restrictions, yes. Let's talk a little bit about these restrictions, because they mourn. I was at an engagement. Now, why can you do an engagement? I'm told as long as it's not with music and meat and wine, that it is permitted. Because you don't want to, I think the Gemara says that maybe someone else will get her. So you don't want to miss the opportunity. The wedding, you could still plan. But the engagement, we don't want to miss the opportunity. So engagement's allowed. Yeah. Oh, really? The week of Tisha B'Av, you got the Rebbe's letter endorsing and blessing you. There you go. Interesting. Where were you? Here in South Africa? Nice. Well, so you see, you got a letter from the Rebbe, but it's written in the Code of Jewish Law. I think already in the Talmud it says that. So it's very interesting how the Talmud balances our rules and regulations and restrictions. On the one hand, we're not going to have a wedding, but even in Talmudic times, I was learning Gemara Ksubas, where it describes how long the preparation for a wedding was. And it was a long-term preparation. Weddings took time to prepare. It wasn't something that happened overnight, not today and not then. And so an engagement, on the other hand, is something you want to make sure that you don't lose the opportunity. Chaparain, so an engagement's allowed. And I was at an engagement party just the other day. Yeah, they had a party, an engagement party. There was no music. But let me tell you, the catering was at this engagement was nice for a wedding. Let's look at the book of Jeremiah. We're looking at biblical sources at first. In the book of Yirmiyahu, Jeremiah says as follows: B'chodesh HaChamishi, can you see it on the screen? In the 5th month, B'esel HaChodesh, in the 10th of the month, Hishnas Sha'asrei Shana LaMelech Nebuchadnezzar, which was the 19th year of the rule of King Nebuchadnezzar, who was Melech Babel, the king of Babylon. Bo Nebuzradan, who was his chief executioner, Rav Tabachim, Omad Lifnei Melech Babel B'Yerushalayim, came and stood before the king of Babylon in Jerusalem. So Nebuchadnezzar was the king who ordered for the destruction of the temple. but Nebuzaradan was his general, or as he's referred to as his chief executioner. Maybe they used different terminologies back then, but either way, he was the one who executed the battle against the Jews and destroyed the temple. You have a question, Chaim? 1 second. Whether first, that's the first temple. We'll get to the second temple just now. The entire Tanakh was canonized after the story of Esther. So actually, there's still Ezra and Nehemiah after that. But basically, by the time the second temple comes around, none of those stories are included in Tanakh. Those stories are post-Tanakh, and they're recorded in the Mishnah, the Talmud, the Medrash, the Gemara, etc. Okay. So here, if we look at this verse from Yirmiyahu, the prophet Jeremiah, and he mentions what day. Let's start here. What day did he say? 5th month. On what day? The 10th. Why is that? Because the majority of the destruction took place on the 10th of Av. The beginning of the destruction, when the Beis Hamikdash was set on fire, was on Tisha B'Av, the 9th. So the 9th became the Jewish day of mourning. And it's an interesting question and debate, actually, amongst the sages. Which day is more intense? Now, that's why I said we don't eat the meat. When do you start eating meat again? When do the restrictions get removed? Only the afternoon of the day after Tisha B'Av, the 10th. Because the temple was still burning, okay? But the 9th, so here's the question that was debated in the Talmud. What day do you mourn, do we commemorate? The day it started or the day it finished? Well, not both, because we don't fast on both. Our sages didn't want to impose the restrictions of a fast for us 48 hours. In fact, so for us, it's about 25 hours. It will start at 5:34 on Wednesday night, and it will end at 6:01 p.m. on Thursday night. Now, how do you get a discount that you don't have to do a full Tisha B'Av? Now, obviously, if your doctor wants you, your doctor says you're diabetic or pre-diabetic or whatever it is, you have medications you need to take, listen to your doctor's instructions. But otherwise, if you're otherwise healthy, this is a very severe and serious fast. I was giving a little mapala in my shul because people tell me, no, I don't do the other fasts. I only do Tisha B'Av and Yom Kippur. So what are we, babies? I mean, like the Muslims, they have 30, 40 days of fasting in the year. Even many Christians, they fast Lent, this, that, and the other. What are we Jews so immature we can't afford a few days of fasting? You know, besides the point, it's healthy for you. It's a way of expressing our mourning for tragic events, and we only have 6 fast days in our whole calendar. How difficult is it already? Couldn't believe that mature adults can kvetch and complain about fasting so badly. No, I can't do it. I don't do that fasting. Why not? I was at a Shiva house last month on the 17th of Tammuz, not last month, 2 weeks ago. And as I'm talking about the fast, some people are frowning in my face. I had to say to them, guys, we need to have I see lots of the anti-Semites these days who talk about Israel's claim to the Holy Land. And you know what many of them say? How could Israel claim to be the Jewish people? Most of them don't even know what it says in their book. Most of them never even open a Bible. And it's tragically somewhat true. We Jews need a wake-up call. Let's open up our Torah. Let's study it. Let's learn it. Let's live by it. So it's very tragic that the people of the book oftentimes don't know their own book. It is. Yeah, you're right. It's been a very tragic wake-up call for us. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I don't have
yeah.
It is enough that I live in all I have.
Yeah. Very tragic. Very, very sad that we have these types of things. These slides were nicer before I gave AI to fix them for me. I made the slides this time. This is a set of slides I made last year, and I asked AI to fix them for me. And I feel like AI messed them. They didn't fix them. I just got to say. Some of them they fixed. Now they messed this because I had here the highlights. Sometimes AI doesn't know what it's doing. Yeah. Nebuchadnezzar was the king of Babylon who destroyed the temple. He was the king who destroyed it. His general was Nebuzaradan. Yeah, that's an English way of writing it. Doesn't matter. Yeah. All right. So let's continue. When we talk about the various calamities and the various tragic events, I was asked the question on Chai FM last year by Kathy Kaler. She was still running the station. And she asked me, why is it that we're still grieving for events that occurred thousands of years ago? How can we continue to mourn these events in an authentic, real way? We could go to Jerusalem today, and like you said, Jews live in Israel, and they have kosher, and they have McDonald's, and they have kosher McDonald's, and glatt kosher McDonald's, and glatt treif McDonald's. They have it all. How could we relate to these events that happened so long ago? But my friends, I think we realize, as we see in the annals of history, every other nation in the world, many have suffered tragedies in their history. Many have had disasters and they grieve. I mean, you see last week in Venezuela, there was a tragic earthquake. I watched videos of it. It's scary. And other types of tragic natural disasters and wars and terrible things. After some time, people find healing. And obviously, grieving is important, but there's an appropriate amount of time for it. And eventually, people move on. But how is it that we are still mourning the destruction of the temple? And Kathy's question to me more so was not only about the destruction of the temple, but it's a building of bricks and mortar. It's not only about, and what I said to her is that it's not only about the mortar, the wood, the structure. We're grieving many other events that happened throughout our history, many tragic events that happened to our grandparents. And October 7th is in our fresh memory less than 3 years ago. Napoleon, yes, very good story, worth repeating. Tzipora is referencing the story of Napoleon, who was once passing by a shul in Paris or somewhere in France, and heard the people crying and wailing, and he was wondering what happened. Napoleon was trying to bring freedom and liberty and democracy, or whatever he was bringing to the people there in France, and he didn't want to see anti-Semitism, and he was wondering why the people in the shul were crying. So he asked one of his advisors to inspect, and they came back and said, it's about the temple's destruction. So he walked into the temple, to the shul to see, and it didn't look destroyed. He said, what are you talking about? What destruction? I said, no, not this temple. We're talking about a temple 1,700 years ago. And he said something to the effect of a nation that can mourn for a temple that was destroyed so long ago will certainly see its rebuilding. We pray for that day, right? Yeah.
Just to give a comparison, it says that when Joseph sold the slavery, Yaakov sold for 32 years. Right? When the neshama feels that the loss is not absolute, cannot be taken out of the mind.
Very good.
When we know it's not an absolute loss, it cannot be gotten rid of.
Yep. So it's not an absolute loss. Very good point. Now it's 1956 years, but Napoleon was about 200. How long ago was Napoleon? Would you put it? 1780s. Yeah. So do the maths for me. Then it was about 1700 years. Pardon? Yeah, exactly. So that's my point. If it's now 1956 years, I think in the time of Napoleon, it was about 1700 years or so. Either way, the Jews grieved then and we grieve today. I just wonder about the anti-Israel Jews, what they grieve on Tisha B'Av, but that's a separate discussion. But sadness is, of course, one of the fundamental, powerful emotions that we all experience. And it's essentially our soul's response to misfortune. The experience of grief is often deep and overwhelms our intellectual capacity. We can't think properly at that time. And while at first sadness can be quite intense, it's commonly understood that time heals many wounds. People who've gone through difficult events in their life. I lost my mother. It was very difficult at the time. We were reeling. But look, it's 20 years later, more than 20 years later. And, I miss my mother, but we were able to move forward. And the same thing when my father passed away. Maybe it wasn't as intense. He was 82. My mother was only 60. There's a difference between a younger person and an older person. Not that to me, 82 was still young. I didn't expect it. It was out of the blue. It was sudden. I expected to have my father many more years. I look in this room, Canaan Hara people are more than a decade older than my father was. And thank God, you should be healthy, strong, and well, and continue going for many happy years. In fact, this week, we celebrated the 105th birthday of a friend. Maybe some of you know her, Ella Blumenthal. 105 years old. So 105, Ella Blumenthal, Canaan Hara. And she is in Cape Town, yeah. And a couple of years back, I brought my kids to visit someone else in Cape Town, a friend of ours, mother. This lady, Ethel Surat, was in her 80s. She's unfortunately gone. But her mother was 109. And we sat there with her mother, who was 109. My son was 9 years old at the time. We had my 9-year-old son and a 109-year-old lady. And we're like, isn't that incredible? So you look at that, and, Canaan Hara, people today could live much longer and better and healthier than in the past. We see people today, 80, 90, and they look much younger. They look like they're the 60, people in their 60s look this age, a few decades ago, not so long ago. Sarah was 127 when she passed. Yeah. Okay, Moshe was 120. But also in those days, I think they had a different longevity, but I think we're getting longevity once again. People today are living much healthier and stronger than they were for many centuries. At the same time, we're probably exposed to we're more vulnerable today than in the past in certain ways, but we also have antidotes and medicine and healing capabilities that could lead us to a longer life. But the point is that when we are in a sad state, we are in a difficult place of grieving. But the beauty is that time does heal our wounds. And with time, we move forward and we forget. When I was in Durban last week, I went to visit a close friend. I have to go back next week too. So I hope I'm going to ask the Rebbitzin to take over those shears. And this fellow is very, very ill. A congregant of mine who I'm very close with. His name is Chana Meir Chaim Ben Leah. And a few months ago, he was fine. He was at Shul. Chana Meir Chaim Ben Leah. Anyways, I noticed after Pesach, when I spoke with him, his words were mumbling, and then he stopped speaking. All he was doing was like making funny, strange noises in the phone. And last week, he wrote to me, not last week, like 10 days ago, he wrote to me that he's dying. He has lung cancer, and I should please come be with him right away. So I called the shul there. They gave me accommodation. I took my kids in the car. My wife was overseas, and I took my kids in the car, and we drove down to Durban, and I spent a few days with my friend. And since then, he got a different diagnosis, and he does look better. But it's really difficult to see a person in this state. And we hope, please God, he has a speedy recovery. I'm trying to remember why I brought this up. But the point is, people have wounds. Oh, I'll tell you why. Because I took a photo with him. I'm not going to put the photo up. He looks schrecklich. Talking about a guy who looked healthy and well, and now looks gaunt, looks like Holocaust survivors looked in those pictures. I said his name. I'm not going to say further. He looks very, very weak. He weighs less than 40 kilos. And it's really difficult to look. But he could write. He can't speak anymore. He could write. So he wrote to me. And I asked him, could we take a photo together? He said, and I said to him, I could speak to him. He hears me. He writes to me. He gives me approval or disapproval. So his mind is there. He knows what's going on, but it's got this terrible disease. So I said that you can look back later on, and you look back and say, look what was, and now how you've healed. I've been on the journey with many people, unfortunately, who've gotten sick. People who were close to us, friends, even family, and people who've been unwell. And thank God they've recuperated. They've gotten better. And you can look back and hopefully laugh and say, thank God we've gotten past that. or maybe a difficult situation in life. You look back and say, we're in a much better place today. So that's one of God's blessings, that without time and the distance of places between us and the unfortunate event, we would never be able to move on from our mourning or grieving and sadness and get on with our lives. And Jewish law recognizes the healing of time, and it's codified in Jewish law. So let's discuss this first in the context of the temple. Why are we still grieving over the destruction of a temple that happened nearly 2,000 years ago? And then let's talk about how this applies to our own lives as well, what we could do with this information. So here is an interesting law in Shulchan Aruch. It says, 3 days are set aside for weeping, 7 for eulogizing, and 30 for cutting hair and pressing clothes. This is a general rule that if somebody loses a loved one, what does it say in Shulchan Aruch? That people will mourn for this period. And the 3 days of mourning are more intense than the full 7 days of Shiva. And the days of Shiva, the Gemara says, or the Halacha, Shulchan Aruch says, is for eulogizing. That the family can sit in one place and can talk about their loved one and discuss, fond memories and cherish those moments and look at pictures and albums and hear things and discuss. And what bothers me is that some people deny themselves this privilege. More than once in my 16 years of being a rabbi in this country, it's already nearly 17, this Rosh Hashanah will be 17 years since 2009. So 17 years already, and plus 2 years before, that means I'm in this country already 19 years, could you believe it? And I could think of more than one time, but I remember particularly once where I was called and asked to do a funeral. An elderly woman who used to attend our programs here, she passed away. Her daughter, who's Jewish, but very liberal, the kind where the daughter's in her 60s, never married, focused on her career. She's a big shot lawyer and so committed to her law firm that she has to go straight back to work from the funeral. That after her mother's funeral, she wouldn't go home for Shiva. I said, let's do prayers one day, at least one day. I mean, of course, I tell people ideally 7, do follow halacha. But if they can't do halacha, let's try at least one day of prayer. No, she's going back to work. She wouldn't even do. I told her that Shiva is very therapeutic and it can help one process the loss of a loved one. And she said to her, work is therapeutic. That's her life. She doesn't have a family. She never mothered children. She never married, or maybe she did. I don't know. I don't know her history. But I just remember what she was telling me, that her work is her life. So some people work to live. Some people live to work. For her, that was the case. Well, our sages tell us in regards to the mourning for the destruction of the temple that it was very similar. And the Talmud, in fact, tells us, let me see if I can put the Talmud up here. The Talmud says, where did it go? Here. The sages talked. I'm just going to ask whoever joined to mute yourselves, please. Let me get a bit of mute your devices. Thank you. So the sages taught, says the Talmud right here, that all the commandments we follow for mourning, we also follow for Tisha B'Av. And here we go. It's forbidden. Let me just finish reading it and then we'll discuss. It's forbidden to bathe, to anoint oneself, to wear leather shoes, to engage in intimacy. It's also forbidden to read from the Torah, the prophets, the writings of Tanakh, the study of the Mishnah, the Talmud, the Midrash, whether legal Midrash or narrative Midrash. So here you go. You have the rules of Tisha B'Av. I should have put that in a nicer slide, but I gave you in the text. So the Shulchan Aruch is telling us from the Talmud, the main prohibitions of Tisha B'Av. What are they? No showers, no bathing. Even this week, we don't do luxuriating baths. If you have to have a quick shower, you could do so, but we don't luxuriate. Look, I grew up no showering at all, but I think we live in a different generation today. And if you're doing it very quickly so you don't smell, the kids are running around, they're jumping places, right? So they sweat. So maybe it's good for kavod habrius, for respect for people around us. What's the second thing it says here? Not to anoint oneself. On Tisha B'Av itself, we don't put on any ointments. What are ointments? No No anti-aging creams. What else do you put on? No makeup. No schmirachts. Yeah, what do you call these goodies? Allergen, I don't know what. Okay, no Botox, all right? No Botox on Tisha B'Av. No leather shoes. No perfumes. Yeah, perfumes go into that category. Yeah. No leather shoes on Tisha B'Av. Now, in those days, non-leather shoes basically meant you're really suffocating. Today, I think there's plenty very good shoes that are even more comfortable than leather. Have you checked if your shoes have very similar looking ones? They're made of synthetic materials and they're more comfortable than leather. What's that? Yeah. No intimacy and no food or drink. So there you go, the 5 prohibitions of Tisha B'Av. It's also forbidden to study Torah, it says, and all these other things that are mentioned here. So while the mourning customs of Tisha B'Av are different than mourning for a relative, but I do see some interesting points. It does say here, however, one may read parts of Tanakh one is unaccustomed to reading and study parts of the oral law that one is not used to studying. Tehillim, I guess we are used to reading Tehillim. We do it more regularly. But I think if you're saying it for somebody's healing or something like that, would probably be fine. But there's plenty of parts of Tanakh that we're not familiar with or that have to do with mourning. Jeremiah, parts of Isaiah, Eicha, Lamentations, right? So he puts it straight up here. He says one of the books that we read is Lamentations, Eov, Job, Jeremiah. Okay, even school children do not study Torah on Tisha B'Av, since the verse says the commands of Hashem are right and bring rejoicing to the heart. So these are some of the laws regarding Tisha B'Av. Pekudei Hashem Yesharim Mesamchei Lev, that they bring, studying Torah should bring one joy. I hope you have joy when you study Torah. So therefore, you will not study Torah on Tisha B'Av unless it's a sad, mournful, morose part of Torah. Okay? So since Torah study is understood to bring joy, we don't do it. The mourners don't study, nor do we on Tisha B'Av, except for the sad parts that were mentioned here. And those are some of the laws of Tisha B'Av. Now here you have a little bit more. Here you have, excuse me, Tosafos. Tosafos says, it is forbidden for a mourner to read from the Torah. In the response of Rabbi Yitzchak, my grandfather, he wrote that Rabbi Yaakov, also known as Rabbeinu Tam, forbade to a mourner even the books of Job, Lamentations, and the sad parts of Jeremiah. He forbade them because they were not taught in the section of the Talmud dealing with mourners as they were in Tractate Tainus about Tisha B'Av. So he said for Tisha B'Av, you're allowed to study this, but a mourner is not even allowed to study that. A mourner has to focus on the grief and the sadness of losing their loved one. Okay. So these are some points about Tisha B'Av that's just interesting. Another difference between the laws of ordinary mourning, meaning where it's acute, where one is mourning for the loss of their loved one. A mourner does not wear tefillin on the first day of their mourning. Did you know that? Chabad custom is that they do wear tefillin, but without a blessing. I remember I arrived from Joburg the day of my father's funeral, and I didn't wear the tefillin till after the funeral itself. And my father's funeral was very late in the day, so I put on my tefillin at the end of the day, just before it got dark. It was summertime. It was June, July 2019. So I got the news here in Joburg. I had davened already the previous day in the morning at Shul. But we're talking about, and Mincha Ma'ariv, I think I went to Shul, even said Kaddish. But when I got to New York, anyways, so that's part of the laws of mourning. Let's continue now with, we just see what they want here. Not sure what this is. I'll deal with it later. Okay. So, tefillin, why don't you wear tefillin? Because it's considered an honor. It's considered a glory to the wearer. It's like a crown on your head. And such visions of majestic grace are inappropriate during a time of grieving and sadness. So naturally, there are people who might say otherwise, that perhaps, tefillin are also inappropriate on Tisha B'Av. After all, we're mourning for so many tragic events that happen on this day. We shouldn't wear tefillin on Tisha B'Av either. But what is the halacha? Do we wear tefillin on Tisha B'Av? We do. and with a blessing. But when? In the afternoon at Mincha. So we delay it to the afternoon when the mourning for the temple is less intense. Let's read it here in the halacha. What does it say? It is logical to assume that we're obligated to don tefillin on Tisha B'Av, since the ban of wearing tefillin applies even to mourners only on the first day. And Tisha B'Av is certainly more lenient than the 7 days of mourning. Also, it's many years later. So we wear tefillin, but when? In the afternoon. Yeah. Okay. There you go. There we are. So that's the antidote, because the temple was destroyed based on baseless hatred, sinat chinam. So the antidote is that we need more love, unconditional love. Okay, but the point here from our discussion is that halacha recognizes that fresh personal loss will inevitably be more powerful and more difficult and more challenging for a person than ancient tragedy that's shared. It's not your own. And that's why Kathy was asking me on Chai FM, why do we mourn for the destruction of a building of bricks and mortar? I mean, this temple was destroyed so long ago. After all, it's only bricks, it's wood, it's gold, it's physical objects. Now, the truth is, we have to realize that this isn't something that's just an ancient tale, my friends, okay? And the Torah recognizes the limits of human nature and our human psyche. Welcome, welcome. So good to have you back. So let's talk about, we know that time passes, and when people mourn for somebody, as time passes, the grieving gets less intense. So the laws and the customs of Tisha B'Av, as the day progresses, gets less intense. Even though the temple still burned on the next day, but it's the beginning, it's the initiation of the process that caused it all. When we were in Israel a few weeks ago, we went to a place called the Burnt House. Any of you been to the Burnt House? The Burnt House is a house that is mentioned in the Talmud that belonged to a particular priestly family. And this family lived in this home, and they served in the temple. And you see the remnants, the mikvah. Their children joined what were they called? The zealots. There's a name for them, the Biryanim, the zealots who burnt down the storehouses of food. And it was a very tragic time in Jewish history where Jews were split and had to deal with the Romans at the time. But the Torah does not tell us that our sadness on Tisha B'Av has to be fresh and raw even thousands of years later. When this house was discovered in 1967, yeah? Absolutely. Yeah.
This is a reminder. The hatred will bring us to that.
Absolutely. And if we don't mourn on Tisha B'Av, we won't remember that. Yeah. Absolutely. And maybe such tragic events like October 7th serve as reminders to us. We don't want these types of reminders, but we forget. That's human condition. The Holocaust was forgotten for the most part. Yes, we have all these memorials and museums, but people forget, they move on. And we got a reminder, no, Jews are still hated. There's still anti-Semitism. The question is, why do we mourn so many years later for the destruction of the temple? Move forward. And here's an interesting thing. We often see sadness as an uncomfortable, but maybe an unavoidable part of life. Right? When something hurts, we cry. It hurts us. But though it might be an integral part of the human experience, if we were given the choice to be spared the emotion, would we consider it? Would you consider it? Huh? Would you consider to get rid of pain in your life? Imagine you had to go to a surgery and there was no pain. The doctor could just perform the surgery and you felt no pain. Imagine if you didn't cry when losing a loved one or any other tragic event in our life. Hmm? Yeah. Real joy. It's true. We in South Africa appreciate light because we have load shedding. What do people from Britain know and appreciate? Do you appreciate the light? Sunshine. Okay, I know you appreciate the sunshine. Get it? You have something to appreciate. The sunshine here. Okay, jokes aside, I spent a year in London. Over there back then, we used to say once in a blue sky. Here we say once in a blue moon. No, but I believe there are nice sunny days in the UK too. Don't worry about that. But the point is, you appreciate something more when you have a lack of it. So because we experience load shedding, so we know to appreciate light. And your person appreciates joy after experiencing, God forbid, sadness and grief and sorrow and calamity. So here's an interesting thing that our sages tell us about the limit to the mourning. Why Jewish law codifies time limits for various stages of mourning. And it's very important for us to understand this. Mishle, in Proverbs, King Solomon puts it this way. And he tells us when we learn the somber parts, it puts us in a state of realizing that there is tragedy. And even though you might not experience it yourself, we have to partake of other people's tragedy, which is why we go to a Shiva house when somebody's in mourning, right? We want to be there with them in their time. Even at our simchas, even at our happy, joyous occasions, what do? You break the glass. Why? You think it's the last time he gets to put his foot down? Okay, maybe that too. But there's another reason besides for the last time he puts his foot down. It's also to do with the fact that at the zenith, at the peak, at the acme of our joy, we should be aware and sensitive to the tragedy, to the sadness that exists as well. And there is so much sadness in this world. We sometimes live in our own bubble, in our own cocoon. And we think because my life is leka, I don't have to worry about other people. But all of you volunteer for me on a Friday and visit elderly people who are isolated, who can't get out, who can't come to our shir because they don't have transportation or because they're too frail or because whatever it might be. You see yourself. Yeah, I'm talking to all of you who are the volunteers. And I'm sure even those of you who are not volunteers, you know it too because you have friends who perhaps lost their mobility or perhaps are in a depression or perhaps broke their hip, whatever it might be. You see it. Every Friday you're going to visit those people whenever you see them. And you realize I should count my blessings, but also I should feel their pain. I can't take it away from them. But actually, when you visit somebody who's in pain in the morning, our sages tell us you do take away some of their pain. When you do Bikur Cholim and visit somebody in the hospital, you're removing some of their pain, some of their suffering. So now let's get to something that King Solomon says that I think is very, very interesting. And then we'll look at it in Tanya. What does it say? B'chol etzev yiyeh moisar. In all suffering, there is a benefit. What's the benefit in the suffering? He says, Udvar sfatayim ach lamachsar. But the talk of the lips leads only to poverty. What is King Solomon saying? How do you understand this? Sadness is rough, it's tough, it's difficult when you go through pain. But King Solomon says the pain itself could serve as a springboard to better times. There's an advantage, a benefit that comes with sadness and suffering. Maybe the fact that you get to appreciate better times, right? Sybil, your family, your descendants of the Alter Rebbe, right? Slanim, the Alter Rebbe, they were the descendants of the Alter Rebbe. Okay, so let's read something here now from your great-great-grandfather. He said as follows. The verse states, you see it on the screen? In all sadness, there would be benefit. That's King Solomon's words, not the Alter Rebbe. Now the Alter Rebbe kicks in. The implication is that sadness has no inherent virtue, the sadness itself. Rather, that some profit is derived and experienced from it. Namely, the true joy in Hashem, which follows from genuine anguish over one's sins at propitious moments with bitterness of soul and a broken heart. So the Alter Rebbe is writing that true joy can come from genuine anguish, that good can come from genuine, true sadness. As he says, a bitterness of soul and a broken heart. So how is that accomplished? How do you get the advantage, the profit, the benefit of pain? What do they say? No pain, no gain. So how do we find the good even in the negative emotion of sadness? Where does it come from? So we're going to look at something here, lethargic sadness versus energizing bitterness that is explained in Tanya chapter 31. And the answer lies in appreciating that there's different types of sadness. And the Alter Rebbe explains this in Tanya. It's actually one of the very interesting parts. And he says there's two different types of sadness. Maybe one is, you could call it sadness, and the other is a bitterness. And I'm avoiding the word depression because depression is a clinical condition. And that, I think, has to be dealt with only with doctors. If a person's clinically depressed, they have to see a doctor, and the doctor has to help with that chemical imbalance and get them in the right way. It's not a laughing matter. The Alter Rebbe is not pretending to be a doctor here, and he's not prescribing a medication for a clinical condition. He is prescribing a solution for a non-clinical state of mind. When we get sad, when we become bitter, and you think about, you've seen different people grieving. People lose a loved one, people experiencing a tragic moment, and they go, certainly people sometimes have an emotional reaction, right? And that's natural, and that's positive. The question is if they get stuck in it, if they can't come out of it. And that's when it becomes troublesome, right? On Friday, I reached out to a friend who I've not spoken to in a very long time. He's a man in his mid-70s, maybe already in his 80s, actually. This man used to come to shul, used to come to events, used to be involved and engaged very much. And then I don't know what happened. Unreachable. Listen, I wasn't that close. He moved out of Joburg. He lived in another city. I would call him from time to time on his birthday, on his mother's yard site, on special occasions before Yom Tov. That's it. But he wasn't answering the phone. And I don't know what I got a bee in my bonnet last week when I went to visit the other guy in Durban who was very unwell. I said, I have to trace this guy down. I have to track him. Let me tell you, if you do a little bit of investigative work, eventually you can figure it out. So I will tell you, in fact, let me tell you two stories. This one's a quick one. It happened on Friday. It's not done yet. Please God, will grow. I called my friend. His name is Jonathan. And I reached out, and let me tell you, we were able to find each other. Turns out he wasn't feeling well. He wasn't well. And here he is. He's back on track. We reconnected. So sometimes you never know what's going on with another person. Just reach out, be there for them in whatever way you could. There was a man who used to come to our program here. This man cried to me. His daughter, I think only daughter, only child. His daughter, one day, I don't know when, I don't remember all the details, but his daughter somehow left them. Well, I guess after she moved out of the house, but she moved on in her own life, and she has no contact and communication with her parents. Now, unfortunately, I'm familiar with the South African faribel. I don't know if it's a Lithuanian thing or a South African thing. Maybe it's just a human thing. Maybe it exists everywhere. Maybe just because I'm a rabbi here, I'm more familiar with it. You know what I'm talking about? The faribel. And there's no faribel like a family faribel. Okay? In fact, you all know of Jewish Alzheimer's, right? You know what Jewish Alzheimer's is? Forget everything but the faribel. So this man described to me this situation. He used to come here, his wife didn't, but they were moving to Canada. He lived for some time in Canada before, then came back to South Africa, and moved back to Canada. And he said to me, everything in his life is good, but there's one thing is missing, is his daughter. His daughter doesn't talk to him. She has nothing to do with him. And him and his wife are brokenhearted. He was, what's that? No, he doesn't know where she is. Anyways, the next rabbi was a lot better than this rabbi. I'll tell you why. Because this guy moved from here to Canada. He was, I think at first he moved to a home, to his own home, or I don't know where. But he joined a retirement community. And this past, we're talking about 2025, this past, I don't know exact dates, but sometime about a year ago, he mentioned to the rabbi who visits him at the retirement facility where he lives, he's probably in his mid-80s. He said the same thing that he told me, that his daughter, and he has no contact. Me, you know what? I'm not going to make excuses. I did nothing with the information. I asked around. I told a few people. Anybody know his daughter? No. Okay, gegangen weiter. What was I supposed to do? But this rabbi, I'm in awe, because this rabbi didn't just hear him and say, okay. You know what this rabbi did? He did some investigative work. And the rabbi asked his wife, the man's wife, who I didn't know, what was the last communication you had with your daughter? What did you get? And she said, no, she once sent us a postcard since she left us. Okay, let's check the postcard. They look at the postcard, and the postcard came from Bermuda, somewhere there, somewhere in, I don't know, Central America, in the Caribbean. So he said, let's do some Googling. In fact, the rabbi in Canada has a relative, I don't know if it's his brother or cousin, who's a rabbi in the Caribbean, Chabad Shliach. So he calls the rabbi in the Caribbean. He says, do you know where this location, according to Google, it's a hotel? He says, yeah, it's not so far from me. I got to get onto a boat. I'll take an Uber. And he goes there. So I'll go check it out. Which, by the way, is a different attitude than other rabbis. I'm not here to bash rabbis. But last week I was on a Hatzalah call. I'm not going to list locations. I don't even know why I'm giving you this Lashon Hara. So you won't have the location, won't be a Lashon Hara. It just shows you contrast of personality. I was at a Hatzalah call. A man passed away. The man came from America. His daughter lives here. We had to deal with, everything. And the daughter asked me, she was in no condition to call her sister. She said, do you mind to call her sister's rabbi in America and ask him to break the news? I contacted that rabbi by WhatsApp. I have the WhatsApp right in front of me. I will read it to you only because it's sad to see the response of a fellow rabbi. And this is what the rabbi says to me. He says, where did it go? He says, first he says, no, I can't. Then I wrote back, please, if you don't mind, the name of this sister feels that she really would appreciate a rabbi near her to call her sister. If possible, I wrote, it's a complicated situation. I'm reading you the text that I wrote to this rabbi. The rabbi says, I'm not a sergeant in the military calling someone to say their dad died. Sorry. That's what the rabbi in America wrote to me. So guess who had to do it? I did it. Okay. It's just interesting to see reactions. This rabbi in America, in Canada, called, okay, again, it's his relative, but still he called his relative in the Caribbean, and the rabbi in the Caribbean said, I'm going. And it wasn't around the corner. He had to get onto a boat to another island, take a taxi. He gets to the hotel. I'm telling you, the story happens July last year. He gets to the hotel. He asks, is so-and-so, the daughter of this man who used to come here to Chabad Longevity Club, is she here? They say, yes, she's the owner or manager of the hotel. So can I speak to her, please? A few minutes later, she comes out and asks, how could I help you? He says, I'm a rabbi, and mentions her parents' name. The daughter says, don't tell me about my parents. You don't know what they did. I don't know what parents could have done so terrible to the daughter. The man says, listen, your father's an old man today. He's living at a nursing home in Canada. He feels that he doesn't have much time left. He wants to have peace and make shalom with you before. First, she's telling the rabbi all the terrible things her parents did. Okay, they weren't perfect. I think she's an only child, so sometimes maybe they spoil an only child more. Maybe, who knows? I can't speak for the sensitivity and details of that situation. But let me tell you, the rabbi prevailed over this daughter. He called the rabbi in Canada. He said, I'm here now with the daughter, get her on the phone. They got the parents onto WhatsApp video. First time seeing each other in decades. The rabbi encouraged the daughter to go visit her parents. 2-3 weeks later, she got on a plane. She flew to Canada. Her first time with her parents in many years. They spent a week or two together, and she came back to Caribbean where her hotel is. And on Rosh Hashanah of this past year, her dad passed away. He used to come here. I knew him, and I knew his only dying wish that he told me was to have peace with his daughter. While I'm saddened that while I wasn't the one who made it come about, I'm glad that the rabbi who did make it happen let me know and told me that information. So it's, what am I saying? Where are we getting through this? There's a sadness, and as Moshe said before, when a person knows, like Yaakov was never consoled about his son because the son was still alive. And when Napoleon Bonaparte was talking about the destruction of the temple, and a people who won't get over that grief, that loss, will merit to see its rebuilding. But what the Alter Rebbe is differentiating here in Tanya, and I put the whole thing up here for you, we'll read it in a moment, is that there's different ways, different reactions. What am I doing with that sadness? It makes sense, as King Solomon says, like Kol Zman Ba'et, there's a time and a place for everything. There's a time to be sad and there's a time to be happy. At a funeral, it's not the time to be happy. And at a wedding, it's not the time to be sad. And when a person starts confusing those two, I was at a wedding very recently, and I saw a young man who I know from the past to be joyous and happy. And I saw him quite sad there. And I had a little talk with him on the side. He's going through a rough patch in his relationship or whatever it was. So at the wedding, he couldn't bring himself to be joyous. We should see these things. We should see when a person's unwell, when a person's not in a good way, that the person should be, Maza, the Shali. Okay, you can put it here. We'll take a later. Tzvi. So good to see you. Tzvi, come join us. Tzvi could give you a shiur. By the way, if anybody needs the car fixed, go talk to Tzvi. He's brilliant. Remind me, Tzvi, I have one story to tell you. When President Jimmy Carter, he was a peanut farmer in Texas, and he once had a visit from Prime Minister Begin. They came to negotiate the Camp David Accords, and President Carter was showing off to Begin. He said, my farm out in Texas, you can drive in a car from one side of the farm. It would take you all day to get to the other side of the farm. And Begin says, yeah, I once had a car like that too. All right. What am I saying here? Is that there's a sadness, that's a heavy emotion, and it lowers our spirit, and it pulls us down. And a person feels disheartened and weakened and tired and weighed down by all the difficulties of life. Okay, you feel morose and lugubrious and melancholy and sad and unhappy and depressed. Help me out anymore. Come on. Have we used up? Have we exhausted all the adjectives to describe this state of being? And sometimes when people reach that state, they feel depleted and empty, a void, and maybe they feel like they want to give up. And we say, don't despair. Don't be despondent. Don't throw in the towel and lie their belly up, because that's not going to help. That's just an escape from the suffering. That's just a deflection. You think inaction is the way to go? No. Says the Alter Rebbe, you have to realize that actually there's a state, that's a sad state that sometimes people get stuck in, which has its place, but don't get stuck there. Bitterness, on the other hand, is something that's much better. Why? Because bitterness, like I said before, is a springboard. It galvanizes our emotions, it propels our spirit to action. It hopefully inspires and compels us to do something. When in 2001, 25 years ago, I was on vacation, holiday in California. It was really a vacation. I wasn't studying much. The days were empty, but they were filled with lots of fun. Going places, doing things. My parents had this shtick we had to call every day. So I called home every day. One day I couldn't get through. Thought maybe my parents went on a holiday too. And the next day I couldn't get through. And the next day, until my father tells me mom is in the hospital and she has a terrible condition. I cut my holiday short. I got on a plane, flew right back to New York, and I come to the hospital and I see my mother, and I started crying. And my mother said, "Your crying won't help me. I appreciate you coming to be here with me, but crying is just going to make me sad and you sad, and it's not going to help. Do something." She said, "You could say Tehillim, prayers, Psalms. You can search on Google and learn about her condition so that you could help and know and understand how to be the best and how she could heal." So my mother was telling me, don't let this, I understand you're upset and you're bitter and you're feeling unhappy about this because it's painful. It's undesirable to hear that your mother's unwell. But my mother was saying, don't let this feeling lead you to inaction and to sadness and to crying. Rather, let this pain push you to change, to do something about it, to change your perspective, because you have to do something, and only that will change and fix the circumstance and situation. She has. Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's the point the Alter Rebbe is saying here in this chapter, that bitterness is a rebellion against the current state of affairs. Bitterness is not a depression where I'm just stuck and I can't do anything and I'm not getting out of bed today because it's cold and I'm sad. No, let it move me and push me and inspire me. It's do something. As we like to say here at Chabad Longevity Club, aspire to inspire before you expire, right? Do something. So that's the message. Let's read it here in his own words. Says the Alter Rebbe, depression is not an appropriate term for the feeling one has when they're bitter and broken about the fact that they are distanced from God and steeped in materialism. Depression is when one's heart is hard like a rock, devoid of all life and spirit. Bitterness or brokenheartedness is quite the opposite. In fact, great Hasidic master, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Morgenstern, you heard of him, the Kotzker Rebbe. I was on the phone with his son early this morning for many hours. He hosted us in Israel last month, spent some time talking. And he had a line. He said, well, there's nothing as crooked, as straight as a crooked ladder. There's nothing as whole as a broken heart. So the Alter Rebbe is telling us here that broken heart is not meant to remain broken. It's an indication that your heart is alive, it's animated, and it's stirred by this emotion. As you see on the screen, such energy is different from the energy of joy and happiness, which stems from chesed, but it is still energy that stems from gevura. Whether you're dancing at a wedding, which is an energy of joy, or the same thing, the opposite, when you have energy of sadness because I'm upset that something happened. But I'm doing what my mother said, and using that sadness as a conduit to pray for her healing, as a conduit to learn about her disease so I can help facilitate her healing. Then we realize the heart possesses both forms of energy. One is joy, one is sadness. But they're an energy, and energy moves us. At times, pardon? It's a catalyst, it's a springboard, absolutely.
The son that he died in
Yeah.
the war.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. We've seen many such stories. In fact, there was one I mentioned last week about a month and a half ago in Monsey, New York, where a couple lost their daughter. And turns out it was their best friend who ran his car over their child. Very tragic, sad story, but you may have seen it. And out together, the two couples joined forces to do something good. And that's where we're saying positivity may come out of sadness, even though it's inherently negative. You don't want to be sad, but but if it leads to something positive, bitterness, this is the whole point, that we want to lead to something better in our lives. And the Alter Rebbe continues here, that the bitterness is an energy easily diverted towards positive. So the point that we're getting at in our discussion, which will wind down for today and continue tomorrow, please God, in another light. Tomorrow we'll talk about finding faith in difficult times. That's tomorrow's shir. This is a picture from the Holocaust. And we're going to discuss how we find faith in challenging, difficult times. This is going to be a very powerful discussion that I want to have with you tomorrow. But my point to you, all my friends, is let's go back to the words of the Alter Rebbe here, because I didn't finish reading it. He says, therefore our sages told us, a person should always excite the good nature, that is, whenever he perceives in his soul that he is in need of it. But the propitious time, which is the time specifically fitting for the majority of people, is when one is, in any case, troubled by mundane worries. You have a worry in your life, use that as a facilitator to take action. Pardon? Yes, and as an engine. And then you're able to hopefully use it to your advantage, that it doesn't remain just in a state of sadness, but rather you'll have a positive, good outcome. And this is the thing. In our own lives, we all have a good inclination and an evil inclination. Yes? Did I ever tell you about the battle in my room every morning? Last night, my kids were out to watch the game. It ended at midnight. We only got home at like 1:30 because I had to drop off some kids and to fill up petrol and pick up some stuff. The kids get to bed, at 2 a.m. So they have 3 hours, 4 hours sleep. 6 o'clock, they got to get going to school. And it's a battle. It's a war. But this war happens often. And this war is one. Now, let me tell you, I don't fight with my wife. She has a black belt in karate. I behave at home. I'm scared of her. But the battle is between my good inclination and my evil inclination. Good inclination says, Ari, get up early. Start, do some exercise. Run around the block a little. Come on, get the heart moving. Get the blood circulating. The other side says, nah, it's more comfortable to sleep. I let the two of them fight, and I continue sleeping. But let me tell you, my good inclination always wins a few hours later. My little 5-year-old daughter said to me yesterday, did you know Messi died? I said, no way, he's on the screen. She said, no, he's here. He died, is here. Okay, so you got to know where to throw the line in, the punchline. I'm going to wrap it up for today. The point is that we all have our good inclination, our evil inclination. And the question is, which one is going to win? Which one is going to come out? And that is the point that I wanted to express today. The idea that sadness can be positively mobilized. This is something that we can discuss about Tisha B'Av itself, because the Mishnah teaches us a very interesting statement. It says in the Mishnah in Tractate Tainus, and it's mentioned in Shulchan Aruch as well, something about the month of Av. And it says that Mishenichnas Adar Marbim B'Simcha. When the month of Adar comes, we increase in joy. Mishenichnas Av, when the month of Av comes, what does it say? Mema'atim B'Simcha. We decrease in joy. So what does it mean to decrease in joy? The simple understanding is, as we said earlier, we have all these laws and customs this week. No weddings, no haircuts, no music, no nail cutting, no meat, no wine, right? We have all these customs this week. On Tisha B'Av itself, we're not going to eat, we're not going to drink, no intimacy, no leather shoes, no ointment, no bathing, right? We have all these rules and regulations, no Torah study. So halacha elaborates on the ways that we decrease in joy in this month. But what's interesting, yet, when it comes to Adar, it says, Mishenichnas Adar, Marbim B'Simcha. And when it comes to Adar, it doesn't tell us how. When it comes to Av, it tells us all these rules that we have to follow. Why, when it comes to Adar, does it just say increase the joy? What's the difference? Why doesn't it tell us when it comes to Adar, just like for Av, it gave us a whole list. Don't do laundry, don't do this. Tell us, for Adar, now you have to dance and go to weddings and sing and this and that. Okay? So I'm going to conclude with a beautiful insight from the Munkacher Rebbe. His name was the Minchas Elazar, Rabbi Chaim Eliezer Shapiro of Munkach. And he gives a beautiful insight. He says as follows: when we enter Adar, we increase in joy. But the Talmud doesn't tell us how we're supposed to increase in the joy. This teaches us to increase joy almost as a tangential remark, meaning you don't need to be told how to be happy, right? Because naturally we know how to be happy, okay? But when it comes to sadness, we're given specific instructions. Don't overdo the sadness. This is how you're going to be sad. And he says the students of the Baal Shem Tov taught that we're obligated always to be brokenhearted and grieving for the exile, for the sad, tragic times, for the destruction of the temple, but never to be completely dejected to the point of despairing. So there's a limit to sadness. What's the limit to sadness? We are told the rules. But joy, there's no limit to how much joy you can have. And this is why our sages established only the specific ways in which to decrease joy in the month of Av in order to exclude all the other manners. You might think I could also decrease the joy by not eating altogether. No, that's only in Tisha B'Av. We're not going to give you extra ways to be sad. To joy, there's no limit. So I think it's a profound point that the sadness of Av has a precise extent that is carefully laid out by the sages. That this week we are sad, but when Shabbos comes, it's going to be Shabbos Nachamu, a Shabbos of consolation and comfort. And there's no more sadness. Don't fall into that state of despair, into feeling like all hope is lost, because no, there's lots of joy to come. And please God, tomorrow we'll talk about not only the ideas of finding faith in difficult times, but tomorrow I want to talk about some more things about the happy customs of Tisha B'Av, what you're supposed to do in the afternoon of Tisha B'Av. The Talmud talks about cleaning your home as a preparation for Mashiach. On the very day that we mourn, on the very day that's the saddest day of the calendar, you know what it says even in the book of Echav Lamentations? Which means this day is also called, what's Moed? A holiday. How's it a holiday? Come back tomorrow for that share. We'll talk about how Tisha B'Av could be a holiday and how we could find faith in these difficult, challenging times. Shkoyach, everyone. Enjoy lunch, and so good to see everybody.